Okay, welcome, good afternoon today to the Foreign Correspondent Club. I'm Joël Legendre, correspondent for RTL Broadcasting. I'm a correspondent here in Japan and a member of the Professional Activity Committee. As you know, the former CEO of failed Bitcoin exchange Mt. Gox, the Frenchman Marc Karpelès, which filed for bankruptcy in 2014, has been charged in Japan with embezzlement and falsifying data. He lived in Japan, capital Tokyo, since 2009. He was arrested 6 weeks ago in connection with the disappearance of hundreds of millions of dollars worth of Bitcoin. So what is the Bitcoin? We're going to talk about it today. It's, let's say it's a decentralized virtual currency that saw the light in 2009. Mr. Karpelès has been, is facing up now to 5 years in jail if he's found guilty. He has denied the charge of the guilt. Mr. Nilsson will explain us exactly what he was accused of. And in this press conference, we're going to talk, of course, of Mr. Marc Karpelès, but we're going to talk also about what the Bitcoin is, this new currency. As you may know, Satoshi Nakamoto created the Bitcoin. It's a kind of technology jewel. Is it the world currency? Some people ask. Bitcoin created in 2000 a powerful tool to transfer money belonging to the users community. This currency is generated by algorithm, and is also a limited amount of money, which makes it interesting. No one can really influence it, we say, but its volatility worries many people. Remember BTC China 3 years ago. This crypto money requires lots of years before to stabilize, we say, and investors often have to keep their nerves. So who uses it and why? How much does it represent today? Where is it issued? In US, in Europe, in China, in Japan? Well, nearly everywhere. How much is a Bitcoin today? But also, what are the concerns that generate Bitcoins? JP Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon just wrote about the situation in a very simple term. Silicon Valley is coming, he said a few days ago. And he described this situation and said that basically traditional banking is going to change and is facing a world of competitive alternative. Is it true that Bitcoin is a tool against printing money? Is it the anti-inflation tool? Mr. Abe would be interested to know about that. But for the believers, it's digital gold. To talk about Kernel's case and, not Kernel, Marc Karpelès' case and the Bitcoin currency newcomer, we have invited Kim Nilsson. He's a Swedish programmer based in Tokyo. Mr. Nilsson investigated the possible theft of the Bitcoins and is going to update us today on the most recent findings regarding the Mt. Gox case. And just for the brief summary, Mr. Nilsson is from Sweden, so he has been learning computer science. He's graduated from Linköping University in Sweden, and he has been living in Japan and working about softwares here. Mr. Nilsson will have to answer to two main questions. Is Marc Karpelès a scapegoat? Where are we today in this issue, according to your investigation? In the second line of the press conference, we'll talk about Bitcoin. Is it a Pandora box carrying the world of traditional banking? Is it a tool for geeks who lost total common sense? Is it just an added speculative tool? And by the way, where can I buy it safely? Also, how can I use it safely? Is my smartphone safe enough or not? Should I go to the dark web? And first of all, how much is a Bitcoin today?
It's about $230 today's market price.
So we can imagine what millions of Bitcoins represent on the market. And we would like to understand why Mr. Karpelès has been arrested. So Kim Nilsson, you are, I repeat, a member of a group of independent investigators, WizSec, and you released yourself early this year, twice, a report suggesting that the Mt. Gox has basically also an inside job issue. So we'll talk about that. And what we would like to, first of all, is to welcome you. So please join me in welcoming Mr. Nilsson, who is going to brief us about Karpelès' case and about the Bitcoin. Okay. First question, do you have any information today about Marc?
Yeah, okay, thank you. It's very nice to be here. The Mt. Gox case is one where we have surprisingly little information from official sources, which is why I and my associates started trying to investigate this unofficially and on the side. And this is still the case that we have very little information, but I will try to share what we have found out from our investigation. So, who are we? Who are WizSec? Well, we are basically started out as a group of individuals who were creditors of Mt. Gox. We lost money there, and we started investigating it individually, but we later joined forces, as it were, because we had a range of skills that we felt complemented each other, and we were able to make certain progress. We later formed an actual startup around this, which is the company, the consulting company. So our investigation as such has been going on since spring 2014. We've been using leaked Mt. Gox data that was released by hackers online. But we have also established other additional sources ourselves. It is important to note that we are strictly unofficial. We have no affiliation with the police or the trustee or any official investigators. So as for the case itself, what has actually been in the news? What have been publicly disclosed? Well, in 2014, in February, Mt. Gox shut down, claiming to have 850,000 bitcoins missing. They, shortly after that, also filed for actual bankruptcy, having completely collapsed. The police criminal investigation was opened during the summer of the same year and has been ongoing ever since. We have had multiple creditors meeting following the bankruptcy proceedings, but very little information has actually been released from the trustee about the status of his investigation. And after that, it has basically been quiet until quite recently, when Mark Karplus was arrested and now charged with several offenses. And I will try to go through them as I see them. So there are basically two charges against Karplus. He has been accused of manipulating records, and this is basically that he is accused of changing account balances in Mt. Gox's customer data, specifically inflating his own personal account by simply adding numbers to it, making it appear as if he has more money, which he can then spend by trading with other customers. The second main charge is embezzlement, where he has been accused of simply diverting and misappropriating money, including customer deposits, for other purposes, to his other companies and even for personal use. There may also be possible other charges as well, which has not yet been disclosed by the police. As for the embezzlement charge, this is mainly a case of classic misappropriation, where he has simply taken company funds and used them in inappropriate ways. This has been made worse by the fact that Mt. Gox had very bad accounting, to the point where it early on may have been completely non-existent. This has left the case full of holes, which I'm forced to presume that the police as well have had to extrapolate and fill in a lot of details, since basically there should be very little source data to go on. Although this also means that if there's no good accounting, then that itself is an inappropriate irregularity for the company. A main problem has been that the bank accounts for Mt. Gox have been commingled with no safeguarding of customer deposits. They have been stored together in single accounts, at least early on in Mt. Gox's history, where both company funds and customer deposits have been in a single account and just used as is for company expenses or anything that needed paying. This includes instances which have been specifically mentioned in relation to the current charges, that Karplus has moved money to his other companies like Tiban and Shape 3D and the Bitcoin Cafe. As a result of dipping into the customer deposits like this, it's a high possibility that Mt. Gox was actually insolvent since long ago, possibly since very near the beginning, since it was acquired by Mark Karplus. As for the second charge of account manipulation, he is accused of mainly inflating his own personal account by, as I said, by simply changing the numbers. He can, for all intents and purposes, make himself look more rich and have more money to spend and trade or withdraw from his own system. This money, of course, never exists, so the result of doing this would be that there's no longer enough money to pay out all the other customers. If, for example, Mark Karplus adds $1 million to his account and then uses those to buy Bitcoins on his own exchange, then the other customers who sold him their Bitcoins will have money that doesn't actually exist, and they cannot withdraw them. The other part of this charge has been mentioned briefly in the press, that there were fake accounts created and fulfilling customer trade orders. That is, if a customer places an order to buy Bitcoins, it's actually met and filled by a fake account, which again isn't actually backed by real money. This as well creates a shortage in the system that results in an inability to actually fulfill all customer deposits, so that they cannot actually withdraw all their money. Mt. Gox has, in fact, historically had multiple instances of having problems processing withdrawals, where they have consistently claimed that this has been because banks have prevented it, or there has been regulations or other legal trouble with fulfilling the withdrawal orders. This, in hindsight, is not necessarily true. It may have been actual problems caused by shortage, even historically speaking. This charge is quite interesting because there has actually been other people investigating this and identifying this before any information came out from the police, us included. This was first reported in 2014, in spring already, by a blog post known as the Willy Report, which had begun analyzing the leaked Mt. Gox trade data and identifying several irregularities. We in WizSec later followed up on this with our own report, which delved even deeper and identified further discrepancies. Basically, what both of these reports have found is that there were automated bot activity on Mt. Gox. This mainly during autumn of 2013, where an automated bot would, at a regular pace, buy Bitcoins using faked accounts with fake money balances. That is artificially inflated, so buying with non-existing money. This bot was actually also later running in reverse, where it sold Bitcoins. The motives and ultimate effects of this bot is not fully known. But what is interesting is that prior to this automated bot activity, there was also other suspicious activity on one particular account, which had huge trades that would be hard to be legitimate. For example, in 2011, this account sold off about 300,000 Bitcoins. It has been admitted that this should not have been possible, because there should not have been any accounts that held that many Bitcoins back in that day, and there should have been no way to acquire them. There are also no traces of deposits or withdrawals to explain how this much money could have existed, so this is most likely fake. It was also later bought back in 2013 with a lot of large trades that seemingly buys a similar huge amount of Bitcoin, in total about 300,000 Bitcoins again. It's worth noting that if these trades in any way actually existed, buying back bitcoins in 2013 would have been vastly more expensive than selling them in 2011, because the price was almost became almost 10 times as high in the process. So any account that did this would result in a massive money shortage in the exchange, essentially being equivalent to the exchange trading with itself in a very bad trade. Perhaps the more interesting detail discovered by both of these reports, in hindsight of the current charges, is that this other suspicious account, which was codenamed Marcus, is actually Mark Karpela's personal account. And this is very likely the reason why the police seem to be focusing on this account with their current charges. If this indeed is Karpela's account, we cannot be 100% certain, of course, but it would certainly seem to be a natural place to start for a police investigation, and the most likely place where they would be able to construct a solid charge. Now, the one thing that we don't see much news about from the police or the trustee is the actual Bitcoin shortage. There was a lot of, upon Mt. Gox's collapse, there was a lot of Bitcoins that were simply not there. And there's so far been no satisfactory explanation of what happened to them. Total account balances, which we can verify, or we can at least, we can see them because they are part of the leaked data, again, leaked by hackers. The data is not necessarily 100% reliable, but it should give us a good indication of how much money was actually in the exchange, and they reveal that in total, all customer accounts in total added up to about 950,000 bitcoins that should have been held by Mt. Gox at the time. Mt. Gox, or perhaps rather Chiban, the Mark Karpela's parent company, has claimed that 100,000 of those bitcoins were actually controlled by themselves, and they would not claim them to help repay the creditors of the failed exchange. This claim is, as far as I'm concerned, unverified, in that we don't know where in the leaked data of the customer balances which of these accounts would be Mt. Gox's or Chiban's. We have not seen or identified any particular location where they would have been stored. Later on, when Mt. Gox was under bankruptcy management, 200,000 bitcoins were later found in so-called old storage. This may sound rather preposterous, in that how an exchange can lose track of a significant portion of their holdings, but based on my investigation, this is actually probably a valid claim. The bitcoins in question were in fact stored in old storage, and only later identified and moved out of it. So combining all these numbers, we end up with the figure that has been seen in the media quite a lot, namely the 650,000 missing bitcoins. But it is worth noting that depending on the validity of Mt. Gox's claim, this could also be 750,000 bitcoin. So, as I said, there's been basically no news from the police or trustee on this topic. So we have been forced to, this is basically what has triggered us to perform an independent investigation. It is worth noting that Bitcoin, being the technology that it is, which is a very public system where anyone can see all transactions, is what enables an independent entity like ourselves to actually investigate this in the first place. A question that is worth asking is, did these bitcoins ever actually exist, or are they just fake numbers in the database? Mark Karpela has been accused of manipulating account balances. This could be a case of the same. There's definitely been instances of fraudulent trading of that scale, although It is also worth mentioning that both the Willie and Marcus account did buy and sell roughly the same amounts of Bitcoins. So on the Bitcoin side, at least, they mostly balance out. So this is not necessarily an explanation for any missing Bitcoins, although it would quite possibly explain a decent chunk of the missing fiat money, like US dollars. So like I said, the reason why anyone else can investigate is essentially the Bitcoin technology. And in order to help you with this, I basically thought I would give you a crash course in Bitcoin in 5 minutes. So hold on. So Bitcoin is a global ledger of quantities, also known as coins. They are only transferable between people who have the right key to them. The complete history of all money on the entire Bitcoin network is permanently visible to anyone. Ownership and control of Bitcoins is done with public key cryptography. Namely, you can send money to people by having their public key. They can then redeem the money and spend it and send it to someone else by using their private key. Transactions of Bitcoin use these existing quantities where they become inputs to a transaction. The transaction cryptographically establishes proof of ownership by signing with the private key or private keys, and then declares a list of new quantities to replace the existing ones. The inputs are destroyed in the transaction, and instead only the outputs exist, which is a new distribution of this value. Inputs are always completely spent. If you want to spend less than a particular quantity of Bitcoin, you send basically the rest of the amount to yourself, to your own address. This becomes important because this is a property of transactions that you, in certain cases, can trace to determine ownership. Since on the Bitcoin network, while everything is public, not everything is tied to an identity. You only know addresses and account numbers and not who owns them. Speaking of addresses, a Bitcoin user will typically have a lot of addresses, and they are all managed by a piece of software called your wallet. This means that This means that while you see transactions on the network to specific addresses, even though you have multiple addresses, they are not necessarily different people. They might be the same person. And identifying which addresses are owned by the same person is a core part of Bitcoin analysis later. Bitcoin transactions are submitted to a Bitcoin peer-to-peer network, completely distributed and decentralized across the world. All transactions are validated, which can be done cryptographically as well, since it is based on public key cryptography. The valid transactions are then grouped together into blocks, which form a unbroken chain since the start of Bitcoin. This is the so-called blockchain. Now, creating a block is called mining, and this is intentionally computationally expensive. This is a property of the network which is necessary for Bitcoin security. So because this is expensive, the creator of the block, the miner, is rewarded with new Bitcoins created with each block, as well as any transaction fees, which can be designated in each transaction. This process is the source of all Bitcoins in existence, and they are slowly created over time and will eventually culminate in a fixed monetary base of 21 million Bitcoins. Anyone can mine blocks, although it is very expensive, as I said, but anyone can mine them, and furthermore, they can start at any point in the chain, but only the longest unbroken chain of blocks is considered true. This is important because you only ever want to rely on transactions that are agreed upon by everyone as being true and factual. By mining new blocks, and adding them to the chain, prior transactions become deeper and deeper, more deeply embedded in the blockchain. This is what gives security to Bitcoin, since on account of it being very expensive to create new blocks, in order to somehow go back and undo your transaction or make it disappear or modify something in the history, you would have to, the amount of work required to do that increases exponentially with every new block added to the chain, because you would have to catch up to the original chain in order for it to be seen as the new truth. And finally, the blockchain is, as I said, completely public. It can be identified, it can be verified by everyone, and it continuously is verified by everyone. And this is how Bitcoin manages to be decentralized. It is not necessary to have any central authority that vouches for any transactions or issues trust for anything. Instead, this arises as a property of the network. There, that was 5 minutes. Congratulations, you are now certified Bitcoin experts. Now, going back to the main topic at hand, to analyze this public blockchain, which is the important new property that enables entities such as WizSec to have insight into cases like Mt. Gox. There are certain technical tricks. On the public blockchain, for every transaction, it's possible to see when it was issued and the addresses of all inputs and outputs. This is completely public, and anyone can inspect them. There are certain properties as a result of the system. If you have a transaction that spends multiple addresses, you can assume that they are also owned by the same person and existed in the same wallet. This is an important property which lets you group together addresses to try to identify them to people and yes, to tie them to actual individuals or business entities. Furthermore, if we could reliably identify the output, which is the change, which, as I mentioned earlier, is the thing that you send back to yourself to keep the rest of the money, you can also assume that this address as well belongs to the sender. This is a process that is normally hidden from the user. It's done automatically by the wallet software, and as such has certain mechanical properties. It's supposed to be done in a way that preserves as much privacy as possible by making it hard to guess which is the change. But this was not always the case in earlier versions of Bitcoin wallet software. This was indeed far more deterministic and possible for people like me to identify later. And in fact, by now, on the blockchain, many big clusters of addresses have been identified as wallets and tied to specific individuals or companies, for example, exchanges. Now, as for how this relates to Mt. Gox specifically and how this can be analyzed, you quickly run into some basic problems, namely that everything I just said doesn't work for Mt. Gox. Mt. Gox has, very unfortunately, early on had a principle of sharing private keys, where users could essentially upload their own private keys to Mt. Gox, by which they became spendable by the user themselves as well as Mt. Gox. By being spendable by two people, it's no longer possible to correctly infer ownership by looking at who spends what. In addition, we are dealing with a case where private keys have possibly been stolen, again resulting in multiple people being able to use them. This makes it very hard to reliably identify true ownership. Mt. Gox also, ironically, unlike other wallet implementations at the time, properly randomized their change outputs, meaning that we cannot easily determine the change outputs, and it's harder to follow the Mt. Gox bitcoins on the blockchain. As a result, in order to reconstruct the wallet, which is the first step, we need some other approach. Preferably, it would have been a very good start to simply receive the list of public addresses from, say, the trustee. Unfortunately, the trustee has been explicitly asked by the police not to release this list. It is technologically and cryptographically safe to release it because it only contains the public keys. But there is a certain level of cautiousness on behalf of the police on this point. So as a result, we've had to fall back to other measures. We've used the leaked data to partially reconstruct it. We have also acquired insider sources. And as a result, we are in possession of a mostly complete address list containing over 2 million different addresses. The sheer amount of this data is one of the main reasons why Mt. Gox is hard to analyze, and why perhaps we shouldn't be surprised that we have not seen any conclusive news from police or the trustee. By having this address list, we can inspect the blockchain and follow the every transaction involving them, and this reveals a lower limit on the historical Bitcoin holdings of Mt. Gox. That is the minimum amount of coins they would have been holding at any given point in time. Through our data and other sources, we have also identified most of the actual Bitcoin transactions that are the deposits and withdrawals. That is, when users moved their Bitcoins into Mt. Gox or when users took Bitcoins out of Mt. Gox. Matching this data up against the blockchain reveals what Mt. Gox would have been expected to hold historically at any given point in time. Combining these two data points, we arrive at this graph, which basically shows the blue line is the expected Bitcoin holdings. It shows that at the time of the collapse, Mt. Gox should have been holding about 950,000 Bitcoins. We know this because of the account balances. But if we track the actual known Mt. Gox addresses, we see that the actual amounts held fall quite woefully short of this. In fact, there started being quite a big difference even back in 2011. But as a result of this, and matching it up against the blockchain, we can also conclude that at the very least, these missing 650,000 Bitcoins were not in any way fake. They existed, they were deposited into Mt. Gox, and there is no legitimate withdrawal of them, meaning that they disappeared somewhere else. And this is what my investigation has focused on trying to determine. So following these coins, a basic approach is to actually look at every Bitcoin in existence and divide them into two groups. Basically, which Bitcoins should at any given point be inside Mt. Gox and which of them should be outside Mt. Gox. And the only legitimate way for Bitcoins to move between these two categories should be through the logged deposits and withdrawals. If we at any point find coins that should be in Mt. Gox spent in a way that definitely does not look like Mt. Gox, this is a suspicious incident and indicates a possible theft of that Bitcoin. So analyzing all of the Bitcoins in existence and all of their historical transactions and flagging any mismatches for manual inspection would be the first step. Unfortunately, there are thousands and thousands of these incidents happening over time. There's a further problem of our data on account of being reconstructed is incomplete. This raises the margin for error. It further increases the need to manually inspect them, but as you can see, if you have thousands and thousands of them, it's quite impractical to go through them one by hand. So finally, getting to what is my current status of our investigation is we have to somehow anyway identify patterns and possible users of these Bitcoins moving out of Mt. Gox, reconstructing the wallets, determining possible suspects, determining their movements, where did they go, how were they used. And Currently, it very much appears that the private keys of Mt. Gox, which, as I said, is what lets you own a Bitcoin, the private keys appear to have been continuously stolen over time, copied into a separate wallet, presumably belonging to the thief, which allows them to spend the coins directly as if it were their own. These coins later were further moved, and eventually most of them seem to have ended up in other exchanges, presumably for laundering. They are basically all of them out in circulation again through other unsuspecting users. This is a big problem because since they have changed hands multiple times by now, this means that recovery is basically impossible. There is no big pile of Mt. Gox coins sitting out there that can be seized by the police or anyone. However, if the thief indeed did launder the Bitcoins through exchange accounts, there is still the possibility of a money trail, or at the very least a Bitcoin recipient, possible witnesses, ways of tying this to a particular individual or individuals. Unfortunately, for my own investigation, this is naturally quite slow progress. The data is limited and my resources are very limited. So much for my status. So what is the status of the other investigations? What can we deduce about them, even though they have said very little? For the police, there have been basically no announcements, or not even media leaks, mentioning the ultimate fate of the Bitcoins, whereas other progress in the police case seemed to have leaked quite readily and have been featured in the media already. We do know that the police have been under quite high pressure to produce results, and I believe it is a fair assumption that if they had any solid conclusions, that is, if they had made more progress than I have, we would probably have heard about it by now. As for the trustee, which is also ordered private investigations by accounting firms, etc. As I said earlier, they have been explicitly requested not to release any data and are also presumably very careful about releasing any information. They have solicited help from Kraken, also known as Payword, as well as the blockchain analysis company. But all this work as well is done under strict confidentiality, so we wouldn't know anything about any progress they had made. However, in the last creditors meeting, the trustee stated that upon asked about the chances of recovering the Bitcoins, he stated that it was hard to estimate these chances until we first understand how the Bitcoins disappeared. This certainly doesn't suggest that they know how they disappeared currently. So, as for guessing about the status of the official investigations, it basically boils down to, if there had been any good news, we probably would have heard it. So that leaves us with where to go from here. And how can you help? You are journalists in this situation. And basically, you should keep asking questions. Mark Karpeles is being charged with what at the moment appears to be quite minor crimes compared to the whole of the Mt. Gox case. If he is convicted of this and the case is closed without any further questions, then every other unanswered question in the Mt. Gox case, including what happened to all the Bitcoins, will go unanswered, and possibly there is another criminal out there who did steal the coins who will get away with it. This should not be allowed to happen, obviously. And one way journalists can help is by keeping the pressure up on law enforcement, on the trustee, keep demanding answers for all parts of this case, not just the ones pertaining to what the police have chosen to charge Mark Karpeles with. And with that, I will round up my my presentation, which has unfortunately gone way over time. I apologize. And open up for questions.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Nilsson. Thank you for your presentation and your explanation. So indeed, keep asking questions is what we're going to try to do here. So the floor is open to questions, to working press to begin with. I forgot to tell you to switch off your mobile phone, but I guess you're used to that, not to disturb our speaker today. So thank you again, Kim Nilsson, for these presentations. And ladies and gentlemen, if you have any questions, I see two hands being raised. Yeah, no, yes. No, over there. First. Yeah, sure. The blue shirt one. He was quicker. Then Daniel will come. Okay?
My name is Tim Horniak, freelance journalist. Just wondering, how much did you lose in Mt. Gox in terms of Bitcoins, and what is your reason for doing this research? How long do you think it will take you to resolve? Thanks.
Okay, I am actually one of the lesser creditors at Mt. Gox. I did not lose that much money. I lost about 12 Bitcoins, which on today's value is only a few $1,000s. While this was certainly the reason I started investigating Mt. Gox, the reason I have continued is basically that the case has been quite interesting. And not only is the technology of Bitcoin interesting to me, but I find that this is actually quite a new situation where a complete outsider is able to independently investigate a criminal case, possibly even make progress that rivals the official investigators. So that is the reason I am currently continuing. I don't make any money of this. This is a completely individual effort. As for how long it will take to resolve the case, that is very hard to speculate. Of course, it's already been over a year of investigation. It depends. Of course, it would probably move faster if there was more official cooperation instead of working completely on the side. But as long as progress has not completely halted, I will continue with it. But other than that, no, I don't believe I can give a estimate on how long it will take. There's been a lot of progress made in the first year that has revealed at least some of the big questions, the answers to some of the big questions. So I'm hoping that will continue, and we will have answers to some of the other big questions.
Oui, Daniel, thank you for being patient.
I'm Daniel Eskenazi, freelance from Switzerland. With your investigation, do you think it can be done by one hacker or a group of hackers? That is my first question. And do you see any link between Mt. Gox and Silk Road, basically? Or have you found any information regarding that?
Okay, as for whether it's one or more people, I think the actual theft of Bitcoins, if indeed it is a theft, I don't want to express myself in any 100% certainties here, but the theft itself, I believe, would certainly have been possible to do by one person. All it requires is somehow hacking in or exploiting access to the database, and you can have access to the keys, and you can send the coins wherever you want. However, if you want to, say, launder these Bitcoins or transfer them convert them into cash, then this would certainly require some skill in covering your tracks and some experience with money laundering. And this would at least hint at possibly a more organized effort. I'm sorry, can you remind me about the second question?
Second part?
Oh, yes, the Silk Road, yes. Silk Road on Mt. Gox so far has been quite limited data. There has been multiple links where Silk Road has had accounts at Mt. Gox, and in fact, Mark Harpless has been known to cooperate with American law enforcement and providing information on this. As for any deeper connection between Silk Road and Mt. Gox or the Mt. Gox theft, no, I have not seen any such link in my investigations up to this point.
Okay, questions? Yes, sir.
I'm Seitar from Sankei newspaper. First question is, it says to be 650,000 Bitcoin are missing. To what extent is Marketplace responsible in your vision? And the second one, and your report is based on the fact that leaked data is almost complete. If the leaked data was only a small portion of the actual data, does your conclusion change, and how?
Okay, as for Mark Karplus' responsibility, assuming that he was not personally involved in the theft itself, I do believe that he still holds some responsibility for the security of these Bitcoins. Mt. Gox was a company that held huge amounts of customer deposits, including in Bitcoin, and this money should have been safeguarded and held secure. Basically, this pattern of theft should number one, you should be working quite hard to avoid it ever happening in the first place. But secondly, you should definitely have processes in place to detect if it is happening. And it does not seem that like Mt. Gox had these processes. The theft continued for a period of years. So at least on that front, I do think that Mark Karplus does bear a portion of the responsibility. I might not put a number on it, though. As for your second question, yes, our investigation work is based on leaked data. This data is not necessarily complete, and it's not necessarily unaltered. If it is indeed just a small portion of it, it would be possible that conclusions change to be more favorable. If there are more legitimate transactions, that means less illegitimate losses of Bitcoins. Attempting to validate the data that we have is a slow process. I do try to do it. But yes, there is a possibility of it being the conclusions becoming more favorable as I receive more data, but it is also possible that they might be less favorable in that if either there is no more data or the data shows the same thing in whatever is missing right now. As for the risk of manipulated data, that this contains simply faked material, this is certainly a risk. I do believe though that the data is so large that if you look at the big trends, you will see the greater movements that would be hard to fake. It would be hard to imagine the data being manipulated to that great an extent or that careful an extent to give that a specific result. So I don't believe that no matter how incomplete or manipulated the data was, I don't believe that the basic conclusion of there being a theft will change.
Yeah.
Not a press member.
You're not a press member. Okay, so look, hold on. I'm going to first ask those who didn't ask questions to come. Natalie, and then you, and then I think you. You're a press member? Over there?
I've been asked to serve the press table, yes.
Sorry, you're press?
I'm an associate professional.
Okay, good. You?
Oh. Hello, my name is Natalie Stucky. Mark Karplus is said to have been the only person inside Mt. Gox to access the servers. So how come can you say that it could have possibly been hacked from externally? And secondly, from my understanding, because Bitcoin wallets are totally anonymous, how does it mean if you discover on which wallets the Bitcoins has been stolen or transferred to, will you be identifying a wallet and not an individual? You won't identify the individual who owns the wallet, correct?
Okay. As for the possibility of there being someone other than Mark Karplus, when Mark Karplus was the only person with access to the servers, we do know that Mt. Gox has been hacked on multiple occasions. Hackers did penetrate the systems, most prominently in June of 2011. This penetration was quite deep, and there is a definite possibility that they retained this access and was able to stay in the systems and manipulate them for a longer period of time. As for identifying wallets, it's true that while Bitcoin is not technically anonymous, it is pseudonymous in that you never have your name recorded, but you're always tied to your address, which is essentially your account number. By identifying and grouping together addresses into wallets, you increase the surface area of what you can analyze. All you need to find is one particular transaction which is known that went from person A to person B, and then you know that person B owns all the addresses in that cluster or in that wallet. So yes, the first step of the investigation is always to identify the wallets, but the second step is to see if you can tie them to an individual as well.
Yeah, please.
John Boyd, freelance. Some clarifications, please. Trustee, what does a trustee mean?
The trustee is the bankruptcy trustee of the Mt. Gox bankruptcy case. He manages the bankrupt estate, collects all the money that Mt. Gox had in its control, and is supposed to cover and try to repay all its creditors.
So this would be somebody outside who wasn't originally connected with the company?
He is completely independent. He is an attorney assigned by the Japanese court.
Yeah, okay. And creditor? By creditor, do you mean somebody who's like a customer who's just using the service?
A creditor is anyone who could have used Mt. Gox, or they had business dealing with Mt. Gox, where basically Mt. Gox owes them money. This could be deposited money or money from business dealings.
Okay. And the company itself, how many people are employed or were employed?
I believe this varied over time. Early on, it was only one or a few people. I think it grew to up towards 20 or maybe even 30 people at its peak, most of which would have been support staff or people to do anti-money laundering checks.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, over there. The lady. Yeah, the lady. Yes. We're going to go a little bit over 3 o'clock, don't worry. 4 o'clock.
I'm Professor Pauline Reich from Waseda University School of Law. I'm an American lawyer and general editor of the law treatise Cybercrime and Security. I've been following Bitcoin for a long time. I have a couple of questions to ask you. I believe Karplus was indicted in the United States, and there are ongoing investigations there. And also, I'm wondering if you noticed recently, I think 2 federal agents were indicted for stealing Bitcoins involved with, I think it was the Silk Road investigation. Have you been following this? And I guess my third question is, do the Japanese police have enough skilled investigators compared to what we might find in the United States in the way of staff that could be investigating this matter?
Okay. Yes, I believe it is true that Mark Karplus was indicted, or at least called for questioning on an American court matter. He declined to attend that for reasons only known to himself. I believe he was called before an American judge to testify regarding his application for bankruptcy protection. He declined this when the judge insisted that he attend personally. As for the 2 American agents accused and recently, I believe, convicted of stealing bitcoins in connection with the Silk Road, yes, we've been following these. They were known to also have been users of Mt. Gox, and some of the money in question moved through Mt. Gox. However, I do not believe that there was any significant connection between that case and the theft at Mt. Gox.
Japanese skills? Last question is about Japanese police skills.
Police skills. I don't believe this is so much a matter of any particular police department's skill. The Mt. Gox case is hard for 2 reasons. The first reason is that it is Bitcoin, and Bitcoin is a very cutting-edge technology. It is hard to have trustworthy expertise in a very new cutting-edge technology field. So you would normally not expect a traditional law enforcement entity or a traditional accounting firm to have the expertise and be this up to date in a case. The second problem, which causes issues, is that the Mt. Gox case is huge. There's a huge amount of data. There are millions of addresses, millions of transactions, and this is simply not possible to analyze and investigate manually. You need to have some sort of specialist tools. And again, since Bitcoin is so new, these tools basically don't exist yet, so you need to create them yourself. So I believe this is a larger part of the reason why there is perhaps so little progress from law enforcement, is that it's basically pushing the envelope, and you would need more technology than exists and is readily available in the market.
Yeah, please. Sorry, we'll take the press questions. Are you press? Yeah. Okay. We're going to come back to you after. Okay.
I interviewed Mark Karpeles about 10 months ago, and I asked him about the allegations that there was a leak in the hot wallet of Mt. Gox. He said Mt. Gox implemented a cold wallet system in 2011, but that checking it, auditing those cold wallets was very risky because you had to compare the private keys with the public keys on the internet. What do you make of that?
That is a good question. Basically, as far as Bitcoin engineering goes, that is nonsense. The very idea of using public key cryptography to secure Bitcoin is that, no, you do not need to do anything risky to verify balances. You can look it up on the blockchain if you only have the public key, which is perfectly safe to have around. My impression of the Mt. Gox cold storage system is that this instead used only private keys, and that when putting money into cold storage for anyone interested is that since Bitcoin is a digital currency, if you ever store your private keys on a digital system connected to anything, it's at risk of being stolen. And one of the best ways of being really secure against that is to have your private key on a system that has never been connected to the internet.
On a paper?
On a paper, for example, yes. And you can then take your public key and share that as much as you want, and you can see your balance. You can see how much money this address holds by just looking up the public key on the blockchain. What Mt. Gox seems to have done is instead only make the private key, print that on a wallet, and not keep the public key around. In that situation, in order to then inspect how much money is on the private key, they would have to take the private key, scan it, and regenerate the public key from the private key, which you can do. But then you have scanned the private key, and that is risky because you have put it on a system somewhere. So I believe this is what Mark Karpeles was referring to, but it is definitely not how cold storage and private keys are supposed to be used. There would have been very safe ways of dealing with that.
Yes, Nathalie, tu as une question?
So Natalie Stuckey, a freelance journalist. So the media has said that this incident has made a lot of bad image to Bitcoin. Can you explain us what role did Mt. Gox play in making Bitcoin more popular at the time, before its collapse?
Before the collapse, Mt. Gox proved to be the first sort of proof of concept that you could actually do something with Bitcoin, and you can scale it and you can do real things with it. If you can trade something, you can speculate in its value. And this was the role that Mt. Gox filled uniquely for a large part of its early lifetime. This proved to be a viable market. It triggered the creation of other exchanges and later other businesses. So it definitely helped make Bitcoin a more legitimate alternative, or an actual viable alternative for money, in a sense. And even when Mt. Gox collapsed, I might add that this conviction has remained. Bitcoin has not collapsed as a result of Mt. Gox collapsing. So while Mt. Gox was in many ways a trailblazer, at the time of the collapse of Mt. Gox, the ecosystem was no longer dependent on Mt. Gox itself.
Yes.
My name is Norbert Wiel. I work for a medium-sized bank in Tokyo. By analyzing your data, which I think, thank you very much for the lot of work which you put into, these trading bots that apparently Mark Karpel has run, I'm still not sure what was the main idea. So coming from a banking background, you could argue, well, this is done for market making. If there is a lack of supply and demand, to make sure that the turnover is higher, to become a market maker. Would you rather have the impression that he speculated, that he gambled in the pricing, or was it the idea of transferring profit out of the high Tokyo environment to, like, let's say, Tiban Hong Kong, where he also had a subsidiary, because there the profits wouldn't be taxed as much? So this is kind of analysis I'm still missing a bit. Thank you.
I don't believe it was for tax reasons, because Mt. Gox would simply intermingle all its funds anyway between any companies. It was clearly not beyond that kind of improper manipulation. As for the purpose of this bot, it is a hard question. All we can really do is speculate. There are no definitive answers. I would say that the leading possible theories is either, as you say, it's a way of creating market volume, for example, to keep the exchange looking more active by simply creating fake traders. It could be a way to try to manipulate the price by constantly adding this little bit of extra buy pressure. Although, relatively speaking, it's hard to say if it would have been enough to actually move the price in any significant way. Many people would strongly disagree that this bot in any way caused the price peak at $1,000 per Bitcoin, for example. Other possible theories is that by 2013, when this bot and the prior account started buying large quantities of Bitcoin, most of the Bitcoins, if you look at the blockchain, appear to have already been stolen and being gone from Mt. Gox. As far as keeping the business running, missing Bitcoins is pretty much a big gaping wound, and it is much harder to fill that gap with Bitcoins than it is to fill them with money. You can always get other money. You can get it from investors or whatnot, but Bitcoins need to actually be real Bitcoins. As such, you can theorize that if you then have a bot that just tries to buy Bitcoins, this makes the situation slightly better for the company, because that's every Bitcoin you buy, that's one less Bitcoin you might have to pay out to a customer making a withdrawal later. So it could have been a somewhat weird and quite short-sighted way of trying to get out of this massive amount of missing Bitcoins by making yourself the owner of the missing Bitcoins. Instead, you would of course end up with a massive amount of missing money, but maybe someone would figure that, well, we can always get more money. We can try to get investment or something to cover that. But as I said, this this is basically not known. It's pure speculation.
Are you okay with the answer? Yeah? Yeah, here.
Makoto Honjo, associate. I have two questions. One is, at one point I understand Mt. Gox was probably the largest Bitcoin exchange in the world, and I would be interested to know what your opinion is of why it came to be that way. The second one is regarding how Mark Karpeles was able to add sort of coins to out of thin air, so to speak. I mean, you seem to sort of say that there is a limited amount of Bitcoins available and that this system is fairly well sort of guarded. But I mean, if you own a bank and if you write some money to yourself and sort of generate money, I think that's essentially one of the things that he was doing. And how was it that he was able to do that so easily?
Sorry, what was the first question? Go on, last question. Start on the last question. Okay. I'll begin with the second question about how this Bitcoin could have been created out of thin air, as you say. One of Mt. Gox's, I would say, main problem that I somewhat overlooked in my presentation was basically that Mt. Gox as an exchange is not actually based on Bitcoin technology. When you deposited Bitcoins into Mt. Gox, it would essentially just end up in a big pile, and then Mt. Gox would have its own ledger to say which customer has how much money. And this ledger would be just a simple list. You could have it on a piece of paper, and you would be free to modify it in any way you would choose. You wouldn't create any actual Bitcoins, but you would create the appearance of having Bitcoins on Mt. Gox. I'm sorry, what was the first question again?
You were talking about the amount of availability of Bitcoins, is that correct? Come back to the microphone. Make it simple and clear, we have two more questions. Thank you.
I'm sorry.
The first question was, why did Mt. Gox become,
yes.
It's a Japanese exchange, it was located in Japan, and why it became the largest Bitcoin exchange in the world at some point.
Right, I'm sorry. Yes, basically, Mt. Gox became the biggest Bitcoin exchange because at the time it was pretty much the only Bitcoin exchange. It was the only company that sort of made it to a point where you could reliably use it. You could send money to it. They had working banking operations. You could deposit your Bitcoins. You could withdraw your Bitcoins. And this was basically more than could be said for other attempts to do Bitcoin businesses at the time. It's easy enough to receive and send Bitcoins, but you always, when you're an exchange, you always have to also have the ability to send and receive fiat money, normal dollars, yen, pounds, euros. And this requires being a normal established company with the usual banking permits and all and all that. And Mt. Gox was basically the first company that became a usable candidate for that. And that's why it grew to dominate the market at one point.
Yeah, John.
Given that you need, or at least the people who are using Bitcoins or investing in Bitcoins, you need a high level of sophistication, I would think. Given that level of sophistication, and given the length of time the thefts seem to be going on, why wasn't it seen earlier? Why didn't people start to worry much earlier on?
That's another good question. It is true that in order to safely use Bitcoins, you do need a high level of technical expertise at the moment. It is something where it is easy to make a mistake, and the mistakes can be very costly. If you accidentally lose your Bitcoins, they're simply gone. There's no way to get them back. So there's a huge amount of personal responsibility involved, and in order to be responsible, you have to be very technically skilled. Even today, I would say that most users of Bitcoins are not skilled enough to be able to safely use them. And this is not a problem with users. This is a problem with the technology still being too new, so that it still requires this high technical skill to use it. Specifically, as for why the problem with Mt. Gox wasn't detected sooner, this is not so much a lack of the Bitcoin skill required, but more of a process problem, I believe. I think the inside of Mt. Gox was quite troubled in the way that things were simply not designed to detect these kind of problems. The software running the exchange was built more with an attitude of expecting everything to be normal and not considering the possibility that someone could have hacked into the system and stolen coins. So there were very little checks to detect problems, and as a result, they could have, and evidently did, go on for a long time, more or less undetected.
Yeah, I have a little question very quickly. There's not only Bitcoin, there are others. I read Satoshi or things like that. How many formula we have today to make such things like Bitcoin currency? How many others do you have on the market today in the world to use this kind of virtual currency? There's not only Bitcoin, right?
Yeah, the number of other virtual currencies are tons of them, basically. In the early days of Bitcoins, there have been many alternatives called affectionately altcoins, but none of them, I would say, ever grew to truly rival Bitcoin. These days, though, it's gotten a bit more interesting in that the existing industry is starting to get interested in the technology, and I would say it's a fair interpretation that the financial industry and the current establishment, they may be interested in the technology, but they don't necessarily want the full package of Bitcoin, which also includes a fair amount of politics from the people driving the current developments.
So how do you interpret the word of the CEO of JP Morgan Chase saying Silicon Valley is coming? He's welcoming it, or is preparing the market?
I think he's preparing the market. I don't think we should necessarily expect Bitcoin as such taking over, but definitely I believe the technology that powers Bitcoin is strong and solid, and will definitely make its way into the financial industry before the currency itself does.
Yeah. Attends. Daniel, tu as une question? Oui, mais elle a posé 3 questions déjà. Vas-y. Come on. She asked many questions already. Sorry for the French.
Daniel Eskenazi, one simple question. What lessons have been learned from the Mt. Gox case? Basically, technologically, does it have changed anything, or what is the trends? What are the trends?
I think there has been definitely strong technological developments. The people who develop and drive the Bitcoin technology have definitely always been aware of shortcomings, and they try to account for them and strengthen the technology. So this includes the blockchain itself, but also what is the recommended way of using Bitcoin. And today we have a great number of additional tools that we didn't have back in the Mt. Gox days. I don't know if I would say that this is a direct result of the Mt. Gox case, and I don't know if any direct lessons have been learned from Mt. Gox, because the main problems with Mt. Gox was not with the Bitcoin technology, it was with how the company was run. It doesn't matter if you use the strongest bank vault in the world if you leave the keys out.
Keep your key. Yeah, okay, we have I think we have to finish soon, but I'll take the 2 last questions. Sanke and Nathalie will close it. Sanke, dozo. If it's okay with Akiko-san. Yeah, make it short, please.
Say that from Sanke. Mark Coupler is said to also manipulate, not only in dollars, but also said to make fake Bitcoins accounts also. Could it be that the missing Bitcoins were the fake Bitcoins? If not, what is the reason?
There is certainly the possibility of some smaller amount of the missing bitcoins being, as you say, just manipulated balances, because, as I said earlier, since Mt. Gox only had its internal database, you could easily have modified it. Although, what I showed earlier with the graph, that showed the list of expected holding. That is the actual verified list of bitcoins moving into and out of Mt. Gox. Any Bitcoin that was deposited into Mt. Gox should have stayed there. It should still be in Mt. Gox if you deposited it. So there's the Bitcoins that are missing are definitely not just an accounting glitch, or if they are, then not just a trivial one of inflating accounts. It would have to be some way of withdrawing them without leaving real and dependable logs of it.
Are you okay with the answer? Okay. So Natalie, please, and that will be the last question.
I would just want a clarification. Did you say that you identified Mark Palace as being the one who was running WillyBot?
I have not identified anything like that. I believe the police may be suspecting it. What I have seen in the data is that Mark Karplus' personal account was used to do some very suspicious and probably fraudulent trading, probably with inflated account balances. We then later see automated activity that also seems to do this thing, but run by a computer. There's no strict link between them, except for a suspicious incident of at one point Mark Karplus' personal account completely stops being used, and there are no trades after that point. And that point in time is 7 hours before the WillyBot starts. So that point of possible coincidence, but very conspicuous coincidence, is what maybe would lead you to suspect that Mark Karplus was running Willy itself. But no, I have not concluded that, but it is a possibility.
So, excuse me, just again one more time. It's not necessarily him who was in reality running WillyBot, correct?
Yes, it is a possibility, and it may indeed be the most likely and simple explanation, but it's not been proven.
Okay, thank you very much for your questions, and Kim Nilsson, thank you very much for giving so many answers. Just to repeat, this Frenchman has been in jail for 60 days, 40 days, without a lawyer?
He's been in jail for 40 days, yes.
Without a lawyer?
I don't know if he's been allowed to have contact with the lawyer. I know his lawyer have spoken to the press and relayed his stance, in which he proclaims his innocence. But I don't know if they've actually been allowed regular contact.
And one more thing which I didn't understand very well is that the police was investigating it, and then he was arrested by the prosecutor. Has the police and the prosecution office work very well together?
I don't know. I don't have any insight into how the police or prosecutors work. I do get the sense that the timing of the arrest was slightly conspicuous, in that it was almost exactly a year after the investigation was started. There might have been some recent stronger pressure to produce some results and run with what they had.
And any conclusion to that? And what conclusion can we draw from that? I mean, it means we don't know everything yet.
The assumption, or what you would take away from that is, I guess, that this is what the police had at the time, and that means that they probably don't know any more about what happened to the bitcoins, for example.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll keep asking questions. Thank you very much, Kim Nilsson, for coming today.
Thank you very much for coming.
And thank you all for coming today for your questions. Thank you.